Welcome everybody. So I'm going to talk about the tradition of Bon as it is in Tibet, and as it's now been coming to the West. In general, in Tibetan texts, Bon is the term used for the pre-Buddhist religious culture of Tibet. And so in the past, especially when I began reading about Tibet, where Western books equated it more or less with some sort of North Asian shamanism. And maybe you still occasionally see that. Now, of course, traditional shamanic practice does still exist even today among the Tibetans. I've met a number of practicing shamans when living in Nepal. But shamanism is not a religion in itself. It's a technique or method of contacting the spirits and curing diseases. So religiously, a Tibetan shaman would be a Nyingmapa Buddhist or Bonpo. And they're known in Tibetan as Pawo. That's the name usually in central and southern Tibet, and Hlaba in Ladakh and in eastern Tibet. And this refers to the guardian or the guardian spirit who takes possession of the shaman and then speaks through them, a kind of a spirit guide. Which maybe you're a bit familiar with here in California, where we had a lot of channeling UFOs and 40,000-year-old Atlantean priests and so on. Well, it's not so different, but the actual purpose behind this shamanism is the healing of diseases. Because one way or another, an individual has offended the spirits who live in wild nature, and these being energy beings can impinge upon the personal energy field of the individual, especially when that's been weakened, and then cause some sort of sickness or illness or bad luck. So this sort of practice continues even today in Tibet itself and among Tibetans in exile. But the Bonpo Lamas are lamas. They're not shamans, and they're monks and scholars, and they have a monastic system fully comparable with the monastic system of the four Buddhist schools, the Nyingmapa, Sakyapa, Gelugpa, and Kajupa. However, there are two old schools in Tibet, the Nyingmapa among the Buddhists and the Bonpos among the Tibetans, which go back to at least the 8th century and even before. And in the year 1988, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was invited by Yongdzin Rinpoche to visit the resurrected Bonpo community of Menri, which is located now in Himachal Pradesh in India. And as a result of this visit with the Dalai Lama and his being very impressed by the system of education which was apparent there, he and the Tibetan government in exile in Dharamsala recognized the Bonpos as the fifth Tibetan school. Now, of course, Tibetans make a big distinction between Chur on the one hand, meaning Buddhism, and Bon on the other. Of course, to us Westerners, they look very similar, but the Tibetans think of them as very different. But if you have Bonpo Lamas with monasteries and Madhyamaka philosophy, education, debating, all this kind of thing, and rituals and so on, what is the main difference between the four Buddhist schools on the one hand and the Bonpo school. And it's mainly a matter of lineage. All the Buddhist schools look back to Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived approximately 2,500 years ago, or about 500 years before Christ, in southern Nepal and northern India, as the source of their spiritual traditions. Whereas the Bonpo Lamas look back to another more prehistoric Buddha who lived a long time before that, namely Trungpa Shenrab. Traditionally is said to have lived 18,000 years ago, but I'm not quite sure how that figure was arrived at. But anyway, it was long before Shakyamuni Buddha in northern India. And it said that Trungpa Shenrab came from a land known as Omalungring in Central Asia, which in those days was called Tazik. And Tazik is a word meaning a Central Asian who speaks an Iranian kind of language. There is still a country up there, that was part of the former Soviet Union, namely Tajikistan. And also in Afghanistan, there are people called Tajiks who speak an Iranian language. I say Iranian, it doesn't mean Persian. It's not exactly the same language as is spoken in the country of Iran, but it is related. And of course, before the coming of the Muslims to Central Asia, there was an extension of Indian culture went up through what is now Afghanistan into Central Asia. It was Indo-Iranian in those days. And there is a lot of archaeological evidence, which the Russians began examining years ago when it was still the Soviet Union, of very early human habitations in this area. And we know that Afghanistan is full of Buddhist ruins, but there's also ruins in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and so on. So hopefully in the future, archaeologists will be able to investigate these ruins. Nowadays, the Bonpo Lamas often identify Omalungring with Shambhala from the Buddhist tradition. Now, Trungpa Shenrab was the name of this Buddha, and Trungpa itself means a teacher in the Tibetan language, and in particular a teacher who is the source of a spiritual tradition. For example, the source of the Christian spiritual tradition would be Jesus Christ, so he would be the Trungpa in relation to that tradition. Now, of course, in the early days, when the Western scholars came across this term Bon in Tibetan history books, which were written in the medieval times, as I said, it referred to the pre-Buddhist religious culture of Tibet. And certainly shamanism was a part of that, and also the practice of Tibetan folk religion, which also continues to today, particularly with the cult of the Yul-La, or mountain god. Each region in Tibet, it being a very mountainous country, would have a predominant mountain, and on the top of this mountain there lived a Yul-La, or mountain god, who was the feudal ruler over this whole area, and all the other Shidduch, or nature spirits, would be under him. And he was also paired with a Menmo, or a lake goddess, who there would be a physical lake somewhere near this mountain. And the local people often considered this mountain god to be not only their patron and protector, but sometimes also their ancestor. And there would be shamans who would go into trance and communicate with the Yula, and offerings would be made and so on. And this is still done in Tibet. And generally, monks are not invited to be part of these ceremonies, which would be conducted by the headman of the village or some other prominent person. Now, this folk religion is in contrast with what we're calling here Yungdrung Bon, which is the tradition we're talking about here in particular, which represents the high religious culture of the Zhangzhung Kingdom. Now, years ago, Western scholars doubted the historical existence of Zhangzhung and its language. They said, oh, these Bonpo Lamas just made this all up because they wanted to have some place where their teachings came from and the language in which they were originally written down in parallel to the Buddhist tradition from India and the Sanskrit language. But more recently, it has now been clearly established that the Zhangzhung is an actual language, and that the Zhangzhung Kingdom had a historical existence which continued up until the 8th century. And that there was a civilization there, and with a religious tradition known as Bon, and which is also said to have extended into Tajik or Central Asia. Because if you look at a map, you'll see western and northern Tibet, which was the main area of Zhangzhung, is very close to the famous Silk Route that passes through Kashgar and so on. And in the Zhangzhung language, we find many Sanskrit words and so on. Japanese scholars I've talked to who have been investigating the Zhangzhung language now very much and are satisfied it is an independent language. It's related to Tibetan, yes, but it's not exactly the same. Yet there's many words from the Zhangzhung language that were taken into Tibetan, and that there are, from the extant records we have, there's two phases in the language, one from the 8th century, which is a bit different from Tibetan, and then from the 9th century, when the Zhangzhung Kingdom had become incorporated in the Tibetan Empire, and the Tibetan language is making impressions on it. Now, it appears from the historical records that there were two phases in this, because according to the Dunhuang Annals, these are the historical records found in Qinghai province in China, in the city of Dunhuang, when the Tibetan Empire was collapsing and the area was being threatened by the Muslims. Whole libraries were hidden in certain caves which are sealed up and which were rediscovered in the 19th century, and a lot of those texts were bought by the English and the with Oral Stein and with Paleo, the Frenchman, and so on. So you find them in the British Library and in the Bibliothèque Nationale in France and so on. And in there it says that the Central Tibetans under the King Songtsen Gampo, who's known as the first Buddhist king of Tibet, because he invited, he married two princesses, one from China, one from Nepal, who were both practicing Buddhists. And so he built some Buddhist temples and so on, and invited the first Buddhists from India to his country. That his armies conquered Zhangzhung, but it seems that they may have defeated the Zhangzhungbus, but they didn't eliminate it as a separate country, but reduced it to vassalage under the kings of Yarlung, or of central Tibet. But in the time, a century later, of Tisong Detsen, who's known as the greatest Buddhist king of Tibet, the Zhangzhung kingdom was completely conquered, and the Zhangzhung was conscripted into the Tibetan armies, both as soldiers and as servants and so on. And its independent existence came to an end. But nevertheless, the religious traditions from Zhangzhung had earlier come to Tibet, so they were not lost. Now, one source of the name Bon is possibly an old Tibetan verb, Bonpa, meaning to invoke the spirits, which is, of course, what a shaman does. But there's another possibility here, as Professor Beckwith first noticed, that in certain Central Asian languages, such as Sogdian, Sogdian were Iranian-speaking people who lived just north of western and northern Tibet, where Kashgar and so on these areas are. And they were great traders, and at least a portion of them became Buddhists, and the word used to translate the Sanskrit word dharma, meaning the teachings, into Sogdian is bun. And so it's also possible that the word bon, taken into the Tibetan language, originally meant dharma. Now, that would explain then this phrase Yongdrung Bon, which is being used for the religious teachings that came to Tibet from the Zhangzhung kingdom. Now, Yongdrung itself means something that is indestructible, so it's everlasting and eternal, and corresponds to the Buddhist term Vajra. I mean, originally Vajra meant a lightning bolt. It was the weapon held by the king of the gods, or devas, Indra. But it also, at a later point, came to mean a diamond. Diamonds were not native to Tibet. They were imported from the Persian Empire, the Achaemenian Empire. And so then they applied this word Vajra to it, and it came to mean something that is indestructible, because diamond is the hardest substance known to man. And Yongdrung then was also used to translate the Sanskrit word swastika, which breaks down into suastika, that which is good. And so this is the origin then of the term Yongdrung Bon. Now, like Buddhism, one enters into the practice of Bon by Zhengzhou, or taking refuge. And what one takes refuge in are the three jewels, the Triratna, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That is the teacher, the teachings, and the community of practitioners of the teachings. Now, among these, the Buddha is the most important, because both the Dharma and the Sangha depend on the transmissions which come from the Buddha. Now, in the West, we are very much conditioned by our historical way of thinking, which began with the Greeks and so on, but also especially with the biblical tradition. And so we tend to think There is the Buddha, yes, as a historical figure, Siddhartha Gautama, who appeared in northern India at a certain point in history, taught certain things, did certain things, eventually died, passed away, and then traditions were later written down about his sayings and activities. And in those days, when we had no cell phones or photocopy machines and so on, everything was oral. And so probably the Buddhist scriptures didn't start to be written down until almost 100 years after the time of the historical Buddha. And this is our usual Western way of looking at things, but according to Buddhist tradition, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, was only one Buddha in the last of a long series of prehistoric Buddhas. There's a list of 7 Buddhas, of which he is the last, and another list of 24 Buddhas, of which he is the last. And these Buddhas appeared in India and in Central Asia in prehistoric times. Some of the great stupa in Nepal, that is Bodhnath, is said to house the relics of the preceding Buddha, Kashyapa. And we know from an inscription of the Buddhist Emperor Ashoka, there was another stupa in his time which he restored, which had housed the relics of another earlier Buddha, Kanaka Muni. So the Bonpos are asserting that their Buddha, Trungpa Shenrup, is in this prehistoric line of Buddhas. Of course, prehistoric only in terms of our way of thinking about things. And that Buddhas are not just exclusive to our planet Earth, but appear throughout our universe wherever you find intelligent life forms inhabiting some planet. So even nowadays, throughout the universe, Buddhas are appearing, teaching, and passing away again. And this process will continue indefinitely. In the Vajrakalpa Sutra, it says that fully 1,002 Buddhas will appear in this cycle of time on our planet Earth. And of course, the next Buddha in both the Buddhist and Bonpo traditions is Maitreya Buddha, but it's not prophesied exactly when he would appear, but sometime after the collapse of our present civilization, which nowadays may not be so far away. Now, from the Buddha come many different teachings. This is not because the Buddha changed his mind or was inconsistent, but the teachings were suited to the capacities and level of understanding of different disciples who came to the Buddha. And so these were then recorded. Now, each of these Buddhas who appear in time and history is known as an emanation body, or Nirmanakaya. And they appear throughout all worlds and dimensions of existence to intelligent, sentient beings. And this also then includes not only India, but Central Asia. So, at one time, Omalungring appeared to be a historical place in Central Asia, but it is no longer. It is now what is called the hidden land of Bayul. It exists in a more subtle dimension that one can be reborn there after death, but in our present body, we cannot buy an air ticket on Aeroflot and just fly there. So we have these 3 aspects of Buddhahood then. which are known as Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya. Now, Dharmakaya refers to the ultimate reality, and the ultimate reality is actually beyond human intellectual understanding and beyond expression in human languages. But in order to make it comprehensible to us, we then symbolize it in various ways and give the Dharmakaya the name Kuntazangpo in Tibetan. That would be Samantabhadra in Sanskrit. And in conventional terms, in iconography, he is represented as a 16-year-old sitting in meditation in the sky, blue in color and totally naked. Now, this is not because he's some sort of exhibitionist or he's actually cold sitting up there, which can turn you blue. It's rather that blue is the color of the sky. And the example of the Dharmakaya is the clear, open, deep blue sky. So he's blue in color. And he's naked, again, because he is without any discursive thoughts or conceptions. In other words, the Dharmakaya is beyond the finite mind. But it doesn't mean this is actually a person sitting up there, like you have in the Western religious tradition. This is the ultimate reality, which is compared to space and to the sky. But in order to communicate with sentient beings who find themselves inside samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, it is necessary that the Buddha appear in a form which can communicate to them. And so then you have the form body, or Rupakaya, which exists at two levels. The first is the Sambhogakaya, which manifests in the highest plane of existence, known as Okmin in Tibetan, or Akanishta in Sanskrit. And this is so that the Buddhahood can communicate with sentient beings. And of course, we are human beings, so we see the Buddha as a human figure. And the Sambhogakaya remains there in the highest plane of existence. And so if the Dharmakaya is compared to the sky, then the Sambhogakaya is compared to the sun in the sky. And then the Nirmanakayas are like the rays of the sun that descend from the sun and the summit of heaven and illuminate everything here on the surface of the earth. But the Sambhogakaya is outside time and history. It's like the sun shining in the sky above, whereas the Nirmanakayas are like the rays of the sun that illuminate the surface of the earth. So Shakyamuni Buddha was one example of Nirmanakaya. Trungpa Shenrup's another example of Nirmanakaya. And in the terms of Bon, then Trungpa Shenrup is the source of the spiritual traditions of Bon, the source of revelation, which is a higher spiritual reality breaking into our mundane existence here on the earth. And this revelation reveals the path to Buddha enlightenment and to liberation from suffering in samsara. But its ultimate source is actually outside samsara. Now you have within samsara, you have the gods of the various religions, and these gods may be very wise and powerful and long-lived, but they are still samsaric beings. They are worldly gods, because they do not know the path which leads beyond samsara, the path which leads to liberation. And so then we do not go to refuge in them, because they are still part of samsara. But this doesn't mean we can't have a good relationship with them, make offerings to them, pray to them, and so on, because they may be of practical help down here in our life on planet Earth. Now, the teachings of the Buddha, which is communicated through these various Nirmanakaya Buddhas, is something indestructible, eternal, and everlasting, which is, of course, the meaning of the term Yongzheng. But like the light of the sun, there can be a lessening or diminution of this light due to the arising of clouds or obscurations and so on. And the world may be temporarily in darkness, but the sun of the Dharma will always arise again. And then the Sangha means the community of practitioners, and in particular the Arya Sangha, the exalted community, consists of the great bodhisattvas who have realized the seventh stage of the path of enlightenment or above. And they are said to be working to stimulate the spiritual evolution of our planet and the beings who live. Now, Trungpa Shenrup historically appeared as a prince in the country of Omalungren, and he belonged to the Mushen clan, and Mu being Zhangzheng word meaning heaven. So the idea is that the Shen clan originated from heaven and then descended to earth. And in fact, there are 6 family lineages historically among the Bumpos, and one of them is Shen. The others are Dru, Pa, Zhu, Meu, and Chung. Now, Trungpa Shenrup was already enlightened before appearing in Omalungren, and manifested in his celestial pre-existence known as Chimitsupu. And some of the Bonpo teachings, in particular the Tantras and Dzogchen, were communicated from Trungpa Shenrup in his aspect of Chimitsupu. And these were communicated to a prince from Tasik by the name of Sangwadupa. Sangwadupa had done many yoga and meditation practices, and he was able to ascend into a higher dimension of existence associated with the highest level of the great cosmic mountain Meru. And here he personally received these teachings from Chimitsupu, and then he descended again to earth to propagate the Dharma teachings, and he also engaged in magical battles with various gods and demons and subdued them. And there are 3 principal hagiographies, or stories of the life of Trungpa Shenrup, which have been preserved in Tibetan language. The first of these is known as the Dodu, and scholars think that this is quite early, probably written down in the 10th century. There was a project to translate this at Oxford University, but I don't know if this has gone through or not. I haven't seen anything from it. The second intermediate length biography of Trungpa Shenrup is known as the Zer Mik, and this appears to have been written down in the 11th century. There are some, part of that has been translated by Franca and published years ago in a journal in Europe, and also summarized in Helmut Hoffman's book, Religions of Tibet. And the largest biography of Trungpa Shenrup appeared in the 14th century with Lodin Yingpo, who had a number of visions and so on of earlier masters who dictated this to him. And this is quite large. And only small parts of this has been translated. The section about the 9 ways of Bon in David Snellgrove's book consists of extracts made from this very large text known as the Zijik, the Book of Splendor in Tibetan. Now, as I say, Oma Lungrung now is a Bayu, a hidden land, and symbolically it is located at the center of the world, and in its center is the cosmic mountain Yungdrung Gutsek, the 9-story swastika indestructible mountain. And in these biographies, there are given the 12 great deeds of Trungpa Shenrup, and there's a small publication from Dharamsala where you can see this in English. So the first of his great deeds was rebirth in this royal Mu clan in the palace of Barpo Sojet in Oma Lungring. And he appeared there with the 32 marks and the 80 minor characteristics of a great being, which is interpreted by Brahmins and so on. So his rebirth is the first of his great deeds. The second is the disseminating of the Dharma teachings, and this began in his youth when he was only 12 years old. And he began by teaching the Jui Tekpa, that is the causal ways of Bon. These are different rituals for working with energies and subduing spirits and so on. And gradually he revealed the Tekpa Rimgu, the 9 successive ways to enlightenment, and the Goji Dzerna, the 4 portals of Bon, and the treasury, which is the 5th. These are 2 ways of classifying the Bonpo teachings. And then thirdly, he manifested the Dulshan Druk. These are projections or emanations that appeared in the different lokas or destinies of rebirth, which are conventionally 6 in number. Rebirth among the devas or gods, rebirth among the titans or asuras, rebirth among human beings, rebirth among the animals, rebirth among the hungry ghosts or pretas, and rebirth among the denizens in hell, where you have a choice of hot hells or cold hells, depending on your temperament. But all of these rebirths, unlike the Christian system, are temporary. They are created by your karma, positive and negative, and so they do not last forever. No one goes to hell and burns there for all eternity. Hell may not be pleasant, but it doesn't last forever. In the same way, rebirth among the angels or devas, this is also not eternal. When your good karma there is exhausted, then you find yourself reborn somewhere else, usually down below in some place less desirable. Then fourthly, we have subduing various beings who are dominated by their anger, jealousy, pride, and lust. These were minor kings who existed in those days. Now he's grown up to be a young man, so number 5 is he marries the Princess Horza Jalmedma, and who is regarded as an emanation of the primordial wisdom Sherpa Jama, called the Prajnaparamita in Buddhism. 6, he fathered by his wife 8 sons and 2 daughters, and taught them the Dharma. 7, he conquered the Mara demons, and in particular Chakpa-Lakring, who had seduced his youngest daughter, and later when her father retrieved her and brought her home, Chakpa-Lakring was very angry, so he set about to steal the 7 horses of Trungpa Shenra and hide them in Kongpo in southeast Tibet, which was the occasion of his only visit from Omalungring to historical Tibet. In 8, he vanquished the Rakshasa demons when he came to the aid of the king Kongtse Chokijalpa, who was attempting to build a temple on an island in the sea. And to this king he taught the 4 portals of Bon. Then, in order to defeat the various Maras or demons, he taught the path of renunciation and demonstrated this as a path by becoming a monk and then retiring to meditate on the mountain of the 9-story cosmic mountain. 10, he retired to the forest on this mountain and practiced meditation and taught his disciples. 11, he taught the sutra system, particularly emphasizing compassion and the practice of the 10 perfections of paramitas. And eventually these teachings were recorded by his followers. And 12, he demonstrated the impermanence of life and the inevitability of death by passing into parinirvana. If he didn't do this, then human beings would despair that they could ever attain Buddha enlightenment, because they think, well, we're not immortal and so we can never get there. So that is why it's necessary for the Buddhas to show that they also pass away. Now, the teachings were collected together by one of his principal disciples, known as Muchu Dendruk. And then there were 6 great translators who translated them into various languages of Tajik, Zhangzhung, Sumpa, or northeastern Tibet, India, China, and Trom, Trom meaning the west, where our ancestors came from. Now, his sole visit of Trungpa Shenrup to Tibet occurred on that occasion when that demon prince Gyalpa-Lakring stole his horses out of spite because Trungpa Shenrup reclaimed his youngest daughter, who was a bit naive and unfortunately got in an affair with this demon prince, who was very good looking but had very bad character. And they produced 2 grandchildren. Well, Trungpa Shenrup was able to retrieve them and benefit them, but Gyalpa-Lakring was very angry about this, so he stole the horses and he took them to a place called Kongbo in southeastern Tibet. It's an area of Tibet which is lower, and so it's filled with forests and so on. It's where the Tsangpo River then makes its bend and starts going south towards India, but there's also quite a few mountains there. So they got together, and Trungpa Shenrup passed through the Dalam, the arrow path, which went through the mountains and entered into northwestern Tibet, and then proceeded to the southeast, arriving there, and then he and this demon prince got into various magical battles, doing things like throwing mountains at each other and so on. And at one point, Trungpa Shenrab took this mountain and set it down, which changed the course of the river. And this mountain now is a sacred mountain of the Bonpos, known as Kongpo Bonri, and it's a principal site of Bonpo pilgrimage in Tibet. Some people I know have been there. I haven't myself. Anyway, he eventually defeated Khyentse Lakring and converted him into his disciple. But Khyentse Lakring was still a bit duplicitous, and later on, returning to Omo Lungling, he succeeded in getting some of Trungpa Shenrab's books and burning them. Anyway, the Tibetans who were living there at that time were quite primitive, living in caves, and were much oppressed by evil spirits, especially these Rakshasa spirits who taught them to eat meat. And so Trungpa Shenrab saw that there wasn't any point in trying to give them the higher spiritual teachings. And so basically he taught them how to do shamanism, in particular Lasola, that is how to invoke positive energies from the gods and so on, and Gektrepa, how to exorcise and expel negative energies, and thirdly Yanguk, how to summon prosperity. But he did prophesy that in the future his higher spiritual teachings of Sutra, Tantra, and Dzogchen would come to Tibet. And indeed that did happen at a later time, at the time of the second king of Tibet, Mahmud Tsempo, who invited Bonpo Lamas from Zhangzhung to the Yarlung Valley where he was living, and he was instructed in the practice of the Chipuk Kor. This is a tantric cycle of three yidams or meditation deities, Walse, Lakur, and Tsochok. And this was the beginning of the practice of the higher spiritual teachings of Bon in Tibet. Then more Bonpo Lamas came to central Tibet, but in the time of the 8th king, who was known as Drikung Tsempo, he became a bit paranoid and jealous of these Bonpo Lamas, and was afraid that they would be higher than him and even replace him as king. So he began the first persecution of the Bonpo teachings, expelling the lamas, and some of their books were hidden at this time, and so on. It's said that a prince from Zhangzhung, Drenpa Namka, concealed a lot of these books. And he reincarnated at a later time when the second persecution occurred in the 8th century in Tibet, in the time of Trisong Detsen. And Drenpa Namka then, in his reincarnation, lived then and even became a disciple of Guru Padmasambhava. Well, Drikung Tsempo was a bit of a tyrant, so one of his noblemen rebelled against him and tricked him into a duel. And then while they were fighting the duel, he managed to throw the body of a dead monkey on his shoulder, which contaminated him, so he lost his Drala and other guardian spirits and had no more protection from them. Now, these early kings of Tibet, they were still connected with Mu, meaning the heavens. by this mutak, or rainbow cord, which went from the top of their head like a rainbow into the heavens. And at the death of the king, his physical body would dissolve into this rainbow and would ascend back into heaven. But because Drikung Tsempo had lost the protection of his guardian spirits, when he was swinging his sword around, he inadvertently cut his mutak, and so he was no longer connected then directly to heaven. And then when the nobleman killed him, his body just fell down on the ground and it didn't dissolve into the rainbow. Well, then the king's son came and took vengeance upon this nobleman and reestablished the dynasty. But there was the problem, they had the body of his father, the king, and they didn't know what to do. So he invited 3 Bonpo lamas who were experts in the performing of funerals. And one came from Zhangzhung, one came from Kashmir in India, and one came from Gilgit, which is nowadays in Pakistan. And these lamas taught the Tibetans how to build tombs and perform funeral rites. Because one of the traditional tasks of a lama was to be a psychopomp, or guide of the soul after death, and also an expert in performing funerals and how to exorcise and pacify shin, or poltergeists, noisy ghosts who can cause a lot of problems for their descendants. And so this then Bon continued as the practice of the kings of Tibet up until the 8th century. Now, we mentioned the Bonpo teachings being classified in various ways. And the first classification here are the Bongoji, Zerna. Goji means the 4 portals or 4 doorways of Bon. And Zer means the treasury. The treasury is the 5th. And so here there are 4 cycles of teaching. The first is called Chapkar. Nowadays, Chap is the honorific word for water, which is normally Chu in Tibetan. Just to make things more complicated, in Tibetan you have ordinary language and you have honorific language. So when I refer to my water, not Chu, it's Chu. But if I'm referring to your water, Karangi Chap. So it's honorific then. And there's even a high honorific language, but most of the Tibetans are forgetting that now. They're not using it anymore. But according to Yongzin Rinpoche, Chap, however, may actually not be a Tibetan word, but a Zhangzhung word, meaning practice, white practice. And this then contrasts with Chap Nuk, which would be black practice. Now, this is not the same meaning that we have here in the West with white magic and black magic. White means you're invoking positive energies. You're calling them into yourself, or the ritual you're doing, or the activities you're doing, and so on. So this is invoking positive energies from a higher spiritual source, such as the gods who live in the heavens, or with the practice of Yidam meditation deities, such as in this Jigpong I mentioned before, which is a basic tantric practice of transformation in the Bonpo tradition. So Chapkar is calling down positive energies, which are white in color. Chapnak is expelling and exercising negative energies, and when they come out, they look black. So it's not referring to your motivation in doing a ritual, but to the way the energy is flowing. When the energy is flowing into you, then this is kar. It's white, and when it's being expelled, negative energy is being expelled, then it's nuk. It's black. So chapnak is doing all kinds of magical rituals to exorcise and expel evil spirits and negative energies and so on. So that is the second portal of Bon. The third is called Peñol. That's a mysterious term, which is also a district near Lhasa, but basically it refers to the sutra system, focusing upon the practice of the 10 perfections or paramitas. Buddhism has 6, Bon has 10. And also the Vinaya, the monastic rule of the monks and nuns and so on. So that's called Peñol. That is the third portal of Bon. The fourth portal of Bon is called Pönse. Pönse means a spiritual teacher, and this is indicating the Dzogchen teachings. So basically you have then Chap Kar, which is higher tantric practices in Bon, and Chap Nak, which are the more shamanistic and magical practices for expelling negative energies. Peñol, which are the sutra system and the monastic system, and then Pönse, which are the Dzogchen teachings and practices. And then the treasury has fragments from all of these 4 doorways or portals. All right, this appears to be a very old way of classifying the Bonpo teachings, but more familiar are the Tekpa Ringu, the 9 successive vehicles to enlightenment, and there's that famous book put together by David Snellgrove in consultation with Yongdzin Rinpoche called The 9 Ways of Bon. Now these are extracts made from 9 chapters in the Ziji, which is the largest biography of Trungpa Shenra. And these were selected by Yongdzin Rinpoche at the request of David Snellgrove and then translated by him. And then this was published way back in prehistoric times in the 1960s. But it was actually the first book in English language on Bon. Before that, almost nothing was known about Bon in the West. There had been a book published in German in St. Petersburg in the 1880s by Schiffner, a translation of part of the Lubum, the Book of the 100,000 Nagas. But this was very rare, and most people weren't familiar with this. So most people were thinking Bon is just, some sort of shamanism. And of course, beginning in the 60s and even more so in the 70s and 80s, shamanism became very popular here in America with the books of Carlos Castaneda and so on. So a lot of people then thought Bon was just shamanism. And I told the story previously when Yongdzin Rinpoche first came to the U.S. and he was invited here to California, to the Bay Area. He was first invited to give a talk at the Berkeley Shamanic Center, which was run by a Brazilian guy.
I was there that day.
You were, okay. He was trying to, this guy was, I forget his name, but he was trying combining, Afro-American Santeria and Tibetan Buddhism and so on. And then Yongdzin Rinpoche gave his usual Bonpo 101 talk, about, Bon. There's actually 3 meanings to this term. The first is the pre-Buddhist religious culture of Tibet and so on, with all the spirits and whatnot. Secondly, there's Yungdrung Bon, which is the high religious culture from Zhangzhung, which he's teaching. And thirdly, there's New Bon, which is based on Terma text, which appeared after the 14th century and is particularly popular in eastern Tibet. And okay, he finished and asked for questions, and some lady raised her hand and said, "Well, Rinpoche, we want to know about shamanism." And he just looked at me and said, "Shamanism, what's that?" And I said, "Rinpoche, Jantri," using the Nepali word. And he said, "Oh no, we are Bonpos. We never sacrifice animals, chickens and sheep." So anyway, because Bon isn't shamanism like we understand it. But among the 9 ways to Bon, there are the 4 causal ways of Jui Tekpa. And they appear very similar to shamanism in the sense that we are dealing with the relationship between human beings and the spirits. And there are 2 systems here, just to make things more complicated. There's the southern treasures and the central treasures. The southern treasures, or Loter Luk, are so called because they were found mainly in southern Tibet and Bhutan, whereas the Uter Luk, the system of the central treasures, these texts were found largely in central Tibet. And so there's 2 classifications here, and there's one for the southern system of the southern treasures you'll find in David Snellgrove's book, The 9 Ways of Bon. And here he's translating tekpa as way, although technically a tekpa is not a lum, a path or a road, but it's a vehicle that you use to travel on the path, such as the car we drove in here this morning. That's a tekpa. So it's actually 9 vehicles to enlightenment, and the usual example is that it's like a boat. Samsara is like a great ocean, and therefore to cross this ocean you need a boat, and so you get into that. That boat is a tekpa also. Now here there are 4 causal vehicles. They're called causal because we're focusing on the causes which make for a better life here on Earth. And the first is Jashin Tekpa. Now here, Shen is a mysterious word, and the Lopan has suggested, or Yongzhen Rinpoche has suggested that Shen could be translated as practice or practitioner. And so Ja means divination or making a prognostication. So this is the way or the vehicle of practicing divination. And inside that there are 4 divisions. The first is Mo, and that is making a divination. There's various ways to do this. You can do this with a mala or a rosary. You can do this with dice. You can do this with cards like tarot and so on. And usually when Tibetan lay people come to a lama, what they want very much is advice on their practical life, and so they're requesting a mo from that lama. Secondly, there's Tsi. Tsi means calculation, and this calculation in terms of astrology and geomancy. There's 2, in Tibet, there's 2 principal systems of Tsi. Kartsi, which is white divination, or it depends how you spell Kar, stellar divination. This comes from India, and this is similar to our Western astrological system. originating from the Babylonians and brought to India, and then later expanded by the Greeks, and some of those Greek texts were then translated into Sanskrit and so on. And this astrology is still practiced in India and also in Tibet. The other system, known as Nazi or Jungzi, Nakka means black calculation. But the black here doesn't mean anything evil. It refers to China. India is called, in Tibetan thinking, India is called the White Land because everyone wears white clothes. And China is called the Black Land because everyone wears dark blue clothes. In communist time, that meant Mao suits and so on. And the other name, Jung means element. And so this is the Chinese system of elements, which you're probably familiar with, and the 12-year animal cycle, and so on. And these two systems of calculation are then combined to make the Loto, or the almanac for the year. Okay, so we have Mo, we have Tsi, and then we have Che, which means diagnosis, particularly for the use of herbal medicines and so on. And then fourthly, we have To, or healing rituals, which bring about a harmonization of energies. The energy fields within the human body and the energy fields in the immediate environment. So To is a healing ritual. All right, that is the Jashin Tekpa, the vehicle of the practice of divination. This is the first among the 9 vehicles to enlightenment. The second is called Nangshan Tekpa. Nang here means a visible manifestation of energy. So this is the vehicle, the practice of visible manifestations of energy. These energies are those which descend from higher dimensions of existence, from the gods and so on, focusing upon the celestial gods, the Tukar, and then the gods in the atmosphere, the Drala, Werma, and so on. These are the good spirits, and you're invoking positive energies from them. Then third, there's Troshin Tekpa. This is, Tro means magical power, so this is the vehicle of magical power. This is to ensure prosperity, control spirits, exercise negative provocations of energy and evil spirits, and so on. And then fourth is Sishin Tekpa. This is the practice of the vehicle of the practice of Si, meaning existence or rebirth. And so this is very much concerned with how to deal with spirits of the recently deceased, the Shin, who can cause problems. And then you do an exorcism ceremony known as Dur, and so on. All right, all of these are the causal vehicles dealing with our present life here in samsara. But beyond that, you have the Dreyo Tekpa, the fruitional vehicles. The fruit here is the ultimate spiritual goal of attaining Buddha enlightenment and liberation from samsara. And so here we have 5 vehicles. And the first is the Genyan Tekpa. This is the vehicle of virtuous lay practitioners. This all has to deal with practicing the 10 deeds of virtue, morality, and so on, making prostrations, building stupas, all kinds of things like this. 6 is Drangsong Tekpa. This is the way of the ascetic sages. That's what a Drangshong is. But this is the Bonpo name for a monk. So this is the path of the monks and nuns, with all the vows that are to be followed and so on. Seventh, there's the Akar Tekpa, the way of the white Ah. This consists of the practices of the lower tantras, meditating and invoking the presence of Ida meditation deities, and then channeling their positive energies. And then 8 is Yeshin Tekpa, the way of or the vehicle of primordial practice. And this is the higher tantras and meditation upon the Ida meditation deities, and even transforming yourself into Ida meditation deity, thereby invoking and cultivating within yourself the wisdoms, powers, and capacities traditionally associated with that our archetypal form. And there, that is divided into the Paju and Maju. The Paju are the 5 father tantras, in particular the Walse, which represents the practice of the enlightened body, Lagu, the practice of enlightened speech, Tocho, the practice of enlightened mind, Gekur, the practice of enlightened quality, and Purva, the practice of enlightened activities. These Snowgrove translates their practice as that of the 5 supreme citadels. And then there's the Maju, or the Mother Tantra, which is also very complicated. And Yongzin Rinpoche is the leading expert alive today in terms of the Maju. And finally, the 9th vehicle to enlightenment, Lami Tekpa, the unsurpassed vehicle. That means it's another name for Dzogchen, the great perfection. All right, having gone through those, I think it's time